Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. So just a very quick video today. It seems as though in this month's issue of White Dwarf we may be reuniting with an old friend, or possibly enemy, depending on how often you ended up drawing bad cards. That's right, the Maelstrom of War missions and cards seem to be making a return. Now, funnily enough, I was actually thinking about doing a video about my thoughts on bringing back some more variety to 9th edition games, and one of the ideas I had was a return to this style of Maelstrom of War card deck style mission. I'm sure many of you remember these, but in case you don't, or you just joined in 9th edition, the Maelstrom of War decks were a set of cards which you could essentially draw at the start of the game and at the start of each of your turns, and they would contain unique, specific objectives which you had to try and achieve that turn. There were generic ones for each army, things like capture objective marker 1 to 6, or destroy an enemy unit, or destroy an enemy vehicle, or an enemy flyer, that sort of thing. But each army also had some bespoke ones specific to them. I've got my Dark Angels deck in my hand right now, and we had things like Flawless Strategy, where you would score a victory point if one or more Deathwing units arrived as reinforcements using the Teleport Strike ability and were set up within 12 inches of an enemy, and then if they were also set up within 6 inches of a Ravenwing unit, you got D3 victory points instead. Or things like Confess, which scored you a victory point if a friendly Interrogator Chaplain killed an enemy in the fight phase, or a Librarian manifested a power from the Interromancy Discipline. They were a lot of fun and usually quite fluffy little objectives that just meant that each turn you had to be on your toes and be ready to move across the board or change your battle plan on the fly to achieve the new hand which you had been dealt. It just added a little bit more variety to the game because you never knew what you were going to get, and that could make things more exciting. You know, if you were quite confident in your little corner of the board and then suddenly had an objective to go and do something else, you'd think, oh, am I going to stick here and stay where I'm safe, or am I going to push out and try and claim that objective that's on the far side and get my get my victory points for that card? This obviously did come with some downsides as well. Notably, it was very much luck based in a lot of situations. Unlike in 9th edition, where you can choose your secondaries, so you know things that you can aim for, and you know the things that you can definitely try to achieve. So you can kind of look at them and think, yeah, I can do that in this game with the army I've got. You know before you take the secondary what you're going to be looking to do and what you're going to be hoping to achieve. With Maelstrom, you were often left at the mercy of the deck. For example, your opponent could get all of the capture objective X, Y, and Z, which just so happened to be the ones closest to his deployment, while you got the, behind enemy lines, where you needed to have at least one unit completely in the enemy deployment by the end of your turn, or even, heaven forbid, dominate, where you had to control every objective marker on the battlefield at the end of your turn. Now, you could keep the cards throughout the game, so obviously you could think, I will do that eventually, and keep the card hoping to achieve it at a later point, and those sort of cards did net you more victory points, of course, because they were harder to do, but it's also likely that if you got sort of cards like Dominate turn 1, you were kind of just feeling like you couldn't do anything, you couldn't achieve any objectives, because it's nigh on impossible to actually achieve some of those objectives by the end of your first turn. As well as holding on to your cards, you could, in some missions, discard one or several at the end of your turn to get rid of the ones that you knew you had no chance of achieving over the game, but still it meant that a snowball effect could start to form early on if one player got some very good cards turn 1 and lead that player to a very easy victory. What I really did like about Maelstrom is that, unlike in 9th edition, where the boards are very symmetrical in terms of the objectives, in Maelstrom you often got to place up to 6 objectives across the board, with certain limitations, like being 6 inches from a table edge or 12 inches from another objective, but it meant that you could be tactical. And if you were playing, for example, a melee list, you could put a lot of the objectives that you placed down in the middle of the board, as you knew that you would be sending your forces up there anyway to the center of the board, no matter what was going on, to get grips with your enemy. So it was likely that you could put them there and know that you'd be safe in being able to snag a few of those objectives as you ran into melee with your opponent. which I think is slightly different to the way it is in ninth, where the objectives are in set locations and they kind of mirror each other, which from a balance perspective I think is great and works really well for ninth. But it does mean that the games can be a little bit less sort of unique, and you kind of know what to expect as soon as you've rolled the mission. Whereas in the Maelstrom games, sometimes you could have like very few objectives near your army, or you could have a load of them near your army, and know kind of, oh, I'm going to castle up here and hope that I get these claim objective cards, and I can just sit on these objectives the whole game and really milk them for points. The Warhammer community article today states that these beta rules they have will be available for players to use and test out and give feedback on to the team so that they can iterate and hopefully make a better version for us to use. At the end of the day, more ways to play 40k is never a bad thing in my opinion, and I think that whilst in general the 9th edition layout of missions is, as I said, probably a lot more balanced overall, sometimes it's nice to have those games which have a bit more luck of the dice involved, and will have a lot more riding on, what cards you draw, how the objectives have been placed on the table, and even what specific mission mechanics affect the game itself. Because some of the Maelstrom missions had their own kind of twists on how you interacted with the cards and the objectives. So there were some where you had to keep your cards face up so your opponent could see what you were going for. Other missions, they were hidden, so you weren't exactly sure what your opponent was gunning for. Does he have an objective to kill 3 units in melee? Is that why he's moving his forces up? Or is he going to swerve off and go after that trio of predator tanks because he's got the objective to destroy vehicles? So that kind of changed up how you interacted with your opponent and how you set up screens and how you moved your units, because you weren't entirely sure what your opponent was going to do. There was another one where you could essentially force an enemy to discard a specific card in their hand. So if they had one to capture Objective 2, for example, and they just so happened to have a full 30 strong Orc boys squad happily sitting on it already, you could force them to get rid of that card, ensuring that that guaranteed victory point wouldn't be theirs at the end of the turn. It was just a lot of back and forth and kind of play and counterplay to make sure that you could claim as many objectives as you could, and kind of putting your opponent at a disadvantage in getting any objectives at all, which was really good fun when Maelstrom worked. What I hope is that Games Workshop managed to take these Maelstrom cards and missions and make them interesting and also random enough to provide a good, fun, viable alternative to the regular, more balanced 9th edition missions, but also focusing on making sure that you aren't completely left out in the cold by getting a dreadful hand right out of the gate in turn 1. Which is why I think that was one of the bigger complaints from previous Maelstrom missions, and so I think that's why they're doing this beta, to try and kind of iron out some of those issues and find ways to get around them, so that it is still a little bit more random and exciting, but not completely imbalanced. As I said, if you get a bad hand of cards. I'll be honest, I'm pretty excited for these beta rules, and I will definitely be trying them out with my gaming group to add some spice to our games of 9th edition. But what do you think of this little bit of news? Are you excited for Maelstrom to come back, or are you happy enough with the current style of missions and maps and secondaries that we have now in 9th? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know some of the coolest Maelstrom cards that you had for your armies. I only really know the ones for Marines, Dark Angels and Orcs, as that is what I played, but I'd be interested to see what other factions had as their unique bespoke Maelstrom objectives, so do let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, I'll catch you later guys.